Hey everybody, Tekking and Barry back again. I'm also joined today by Sun God Luffy and another sun god and guardian deity of all of ancient Egypt. Let's hear it for the winged dragon of Ra. Let's hear it for Ra, everybody. Ra! Ra! I think Luffy would have been able to beat Merrick in Battle City. If it was Luffy versus Merrick instead of Joey versus Merrick, I don't think Luffy would have passed out at the last second. I think he would have been able to get that attack through, you know? Still feel salty about that with Joey losing. Joey should have beat Merrick there. That's just how it should have went. Anyway, today's video, what are we talking about today? We're talking about magical cubes that create rainbow bridges. You know, yesterday, I was out for lunch with my dad, and I got to give you a picture of my dad here. He just recently retired. He's a country kind of guy, loves to hunt, loves to fish. That's my dad. If you ever saw Isekai D&D, Old Tony, that's basically my dad. And my dad does not watch anime. He has no idea what any reference of like One Piece is or anything. He knows I talk about it. He knows like generally what I do, but that's kind of it. So he's like, yeah, so what are you doing later today or tomorrow? You making a video? And I'm like, yeah, I'm probably going to make a video about this magical cube in the world of One Piece that creates rainbow bridges that they can then sail their ships on. And he's like, all right. And I'm like, that's what I do. That's my career path that I chose in my life. So yeah, you know, it's interesting because as I said in the review, this is a reference to something that is actually historical. Okay, the Vikings really did have magical sunstones called painters way back in the day. The Vikings, that's how Leif Erikson discovered Vinland. He used a magical rainbow bridge from Greenland all the way to Newfoundland in Canada. It's still there today. You can only just see it on certain days, but the magical rainbow bridge of Leif Erikson, it's still there, trust me. It goes right to Newfoundland, and then it bounces over to L'Anse Meadows, and then it lands on Prince Edward Island. That's how it goes, right? Okay. So this is the new magical tchotchke thing that we're gonna find. That's a fun word, right? Tchotchke? Yeah. Anyway, so this is like the magical thing that we're gonna see in this arc. You know, with Skypiea, it was dials. He had these little seashells that create a bunch of crazy effects. Down in Fishman Island, this wasn't really, they didn't spend a lot of time with these, but it was the bubbly coral, the little corals that you press and then bubbles are created and you can kind of float around a little bit on those. The bubbles also operate at the Sabaody Archipelago and anywhere that's around the Mother Tree Eve. And in ELBAPH, we have the painters or the sunstones, okay? So, Broggy kind of explained it. Not really. He didn't honestly explain it. All Broggy really said was because everybody was looking at this magical rainbow that was very clearly more vivid than a regular rainbow, okay? Normal rainbows do exist in One Piece. They even saw, I think it was when they were going from Thriller Bark to Sabaody, there was a chapter where the Straw Hats encountered a bunch of random stuff in the Grand Line. Like, Oda just gave us like a lightning round of like, oh, it's raining candy, because in Japanese, ame, and ame means candy, so it's candy rain, right? And then they also see a circle rainbow in the sky, which is actually an omen for like bad things to happen and stuff like that. So, you know, you see certain things in the Grand Line. So regular rainbows exist, certainly. However, this rainbow in particular was a lot more solid. So they're like, what's the deal with that? And Dory and Broggy are like, yeah, that's the magical rainbow bridge. We're going to take this and go right up to the tree. It shouldn't take too long. And everyone's like, how does that work? And then Broggy just pulls out the little cube and he just says, with this, it's called a painter. We use it to make the giant rainbow bridges. That's all. That's all. Now, granted, we're going to find out more about this technology as we go throughout ELBAPH. Remember, Lilith is there as well, and Lilith has been on ELBAPH before, so she might elucidate us on exactly the science behind how this works. Or maybe it isn't science. Maybe she's just like, yeah, I have no idea how that works. It's just a magical piece of calcite that creates tangible rainbows that you can sail on. Here's another question. Is there anything else this thing can make, right? Because it was first mentioned by Stanson when Hyrudin and Stanson took out that giant moose in the underworld, and they were trying to figure out a way to get back up to the sun level, and they're like, well, we can use a painter, but then Stanson was like, well, unfortunately, the sunstone's not going to work when we don't have access to the sun. When it's snowing this heavy and there's like a heavy cloud cover in the underworld, we won't be able to use that, okay? So I'm assuming the original plan was, if they could, to use one of their own sunstones, their painters, to create a rainbow bridge that they could then get on, and then that rainbow bridge would connect either to the main one that led up to the sun level, the ones that the Great Eric and the Straw Hats took, or it just creates its own rainbow bridge, like temporarily, like a smaller one that allows us to get to the sun level, okay? One or the two, okay? Now, it didn't work in that instance, so they had to just pick up the giant moose dinosaur and then carry it to, you know, outside of the island so they can carry it around and then go up the main rainbow bridge on the side. Everybody following along with that? Right. So I'm assuming it's similar to a Milky Dial, but there are probably going to be some key differences that Oda's going to bring up as we go about throughout this entire arc, okay? Like, for example, one thing is, how long do these last, okay? Now, with the Milky Roads at Skypiea, they seem to last indefinitely. Like, if you just create one, like, there was a bunch of Milky Roads snaking all the way through Upper Yard and everything like that. They didn't seem to need to be, like, refreshed every so often. They seem to be pretty stable, okay? As long as you're in a particular climate zone, it seemed to be okay. Probably the same thing with the Rainbow Bridge. Like, I don't think you have to, like, maybe they do. Maybe the Giants every once a year or something have to, like, repaint the bridge or it'll lose its luster or something like that. Like, oh yeah, the Rainbow Bridge, you know, somebody just touched it up a little bit. Fresh coat of paint. Oh, it looks really good there, right? It's also not just, like, we learn a little bit about the physics of it in the last chapter, okay? So the Rainbow Bridge doesn't have any water resistance because it's not water. It's a rainbow, right? It's a magical rainbow in the sky, okay? Oda can just make up whatever physics he wants for this thing, okay? But anyway, yeah, there's no water resistance. So if you just get on the Rainbow Bridge and you just kind of like row like once or twice to kind of like get that forward momentum going, you just kind of coast and you go. Now, like eventually you'd probably run out of momentum and you'd stop, right? But if you just have the sails going and you got some wind to help you, or just like row like once every minute, that'll probably keep you going. And honestly, the fact that Oda specifically brought up there's no water resistance, that might actually be a key point. So maybe put that in your back pocket for right now. Because I'm picturing a scene now where, yeah, right now the bridge is just this magical little thing that they use to get up to the sun level, and they're taking a nice leisurely trip up there, and they're looking down, and they're like, oh man, it's twinkling. But the fact is, like, if you could use this thing later on in the arc, like during the final battle with whoever that would be, you know, Loki, Shiki, the zombie corpse of King Harold back from the dead, maybe Hyruden is going to be the final villain. Maybe Road turns out to be way more dangerous than we thought he was going to be. I don't know. At any rate, final battle. Somebody has to, like Luffy needs to get over somewhere, which, I don't know, he can fly now, but whatever. Let's say somebody needs to get over somewhere, so they use the painter to create a magical rainbow bridge, and there's no water resistance. So somebody could just dive in there. Oh, dude, Jinbei could go wicked fast in that thing, probably. Because it still seems to have the consistency of water. Like, you can sail a ship on it. If you can sail a ship on this thing, that also means you can swim in it, which means this is going to be Jinbei's jam. Jinbei's going to be doing the jellyfish jam in this rainbow bridge. Jumps in the rainbow bridge, just, you know, paddles super fast. That's a paddling. And then... I'd have that on standby at all times. And then just like, Jinbei could be like a freaking shark torpedo on this thing. Just rocketing right toward an enemy, shoots off of the rainbow bridge and slams right into them with that fishman karate. That'll be fun. That'll be cool to see that, right? We can see that. But yeah, you can see it from a bunch of different directions. Even jumping on a boat, like they could take out the waiver or something, could work on that. The Straw Hats still do have the waiver. It's the Shiro Mokuba #1. It doesn't get to be shown a lot, but they do still have it. Nami could jump on that thing. It would be very similar to Skypiea in the way that I'm describing this right now. But also, I mean, you could see some similarities between ELBAPH and Skypiea. Honestly, you could see some similarities between Egghead and Skypiea, all right? In fact, Vegapunk and the Punk Records is going to Weatheria right now. So it was interesting because we had Skypiea way early on in One Piece, and we didn't really touch upon Sky Islands or Island Clouds or Dials all that much outside of, like, Usopp using them for, like, the perfect climate act and his Kabuto and stuff. Beyond that, we just kind of like, yeah, Sky Islands, they exist. Maybe they'll show up in the story. Nami went to Weatheria. Okay, that was cool. And then now, way at the end, it's like Oda's going back and being like, oh no, Sky Islands, we're gonna go back and explore a lot of different stuff with that. It was almost like Oda needed to set up Skypiea early on to give us the concept of, like, what Dials and Island Cloud and sea clouds and all these things are, so then later when he uses them again, he's just like, I can just pull these out of, you know, the work chest whenever I need, and people understand what they are, right? So just keep that in mind. Utilizing the rainbow bridges for combats, very useful. Now, when it comes to these things, they are a reference to calcite, okay, which is an actual mineral that exists in our world that was used as a sunstone. That's what the Vikings and the Norse called it back in the day. It's a prism that allows you, under certain circumstances, to, even through the cloud layer, see and pinpoint the location of the sun, which is very useful for maritime navigation, okay? So that's what the Vikings did, right? Go read Dr. Stone Volume 17. It's mentioned and explained a lot better in there exactly how that works, okay? So once again, if you don't know anything about biology or, I don't know, biology, if you don't know anything about biology or geology or physics or science in general, Dr. Stone is basically the same thing as an entire college education, essentially. If you read all of Dr. Stone, you qualify as a PhD. That's how that works, right? So anyway, it was based on a real thing, okay? So I'm thinking the way that this works in the world of One Piece, and considering the Giants also worship Nika, who's a sun deity, is that these things are called the Sunstone, all right? But they're also called the Painters because that's what they do, right? Maybe the Sunstone is the name of the rock, but Painter is like just the generic term the Giants call it because they literally paint things with it, right? So they hold this thing up to the sun, and the sunlight goes through the prism, and instead of it just, doing the thing it would in our world, which is just, it, bends the light, and that's really cool, and you could use that for some stuff. No, it actually, maybe stores the light energy in the sunstone, and then you can actually physically just move it around. And maybe this isn't Bragi pulled this out as this is what a sunstone is. It might also just be the battery or the device that's used to power the main device. Because, I could see how they could make a rainbow bridge with this cube. They take a bunch of cubes out together and, it hits the sun and then it bounces off and it, creates a rainbow bridge. But I could also see it being, an actual paintbrush, we're going from Super Mario Sunshine and stuff like that, right? You take a giant paintbrush or multiple giant paintbrushes the Giants get, and then they load these things in there. Sorry, Luffy. And then they load these things in there like a battery, and it powers up the paintbrush, and the paintbrush gets all magical and iridescent and multicolored and everything like that. And then they all begin to paint and stuff like that, right? Interestingly enough, when we get to the ELBAPH village, we don't really see, we see the rainbow bridge that carries you there, but we don't see any other, rainbow constructs and things. So it might only be able to be used when making the river. I was thinking, could you make a house out of rainbows? Could you make weapons out of rainbows? Could you make a rainbow, maybe not a river, but could you make a rainbow like pond or lake or something like that, right? Could you make a rainbow cloud? Are there other substances and things you can use with this? Or is it literally just no, you just make a path, and then that path has no resistance and you can just move things along that path? That would make things easy for production. You could basically use it in lieu of a conveyor belt. You could just use little rainbows there and then assemble things, and it moves on the path or to the next thing over. I don't know. That's a rather lame application of it. Magical world of ELBAPH, the world where you can use a sunstone to make rainbows that can do a bunch of things. How are you going to use them? We'll make them in the sweatshops, in the factories. We'll use them to create giant goods to be sold throughout the world. Yeah, that's kind of a lame way to utilize them, but it is kind of like a conveyor belt. I guess you could. This magical, whimsical thing, that's how Santa would use it. Santa's got a lot of labor in his workshop, guys. He's got to make a lot of toys for Christmas. A lot of people want a lot of stuff, okay? Santa's up there at his workshop. He's like, oh man, you know how many orders he gets for a PlayStation 5? He's got to make all of those from hand, okay? So he's using magical rainbow powers and magical elf labor to create all these things, right? But okay, we're getting off topic again. Let's move back to the sun deity, okay? So the Giants worship the sun god Nika. That was already explained. Bragi kind of mentioned this to Luffy at Egghead. He's just like, hey, Straw Hat, what, are you cosplaying as our sun god? That's a little strange. You look just like the guy. And Luffy still... Nobody has actually sat Luffy down yet and truly explained, what like the sun deity is, like who Nika really is, which I find hilarious. Every time he goes into that form, somebody somewhere compares him to the sun god, and Luffy's just like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm Luffy. So maybe here in ELBAPH, maybe somebody will set Luffy down and actually explain to him, like, yeah, this is our sun deity. His name is Nika. He lives in the heaven lair. Maybe that is, hey, maybe that's where the heaven lair, what that's all about. Maybe there's like a temple to the sun god up there and everything like that. Because it is the area that would be closest to the sun, like at the very, very top of the tree. Luffy might go, Luffy wants to climb to the top of the tree. That in Luffy's mind, that's going to be one of his first instincts. Maybe the final battle of ELBAPH takes place at the very tippy top of the tree. They go up there, and there's a falcon hanging out on the top of the tree. Luffy pops out, and there's this falcon that's the size of a 10-story building, and the falcon is just like, hey. Or maybe it's a hawk. I think it's a hawk. Either way, he goes up there and sees a giant bird, okay? And then maybe the giant bird is going to be the final villain of ELBAPH. Place your bets. I don't know who the final villain's going to be, but I just don't think it's going to be Loki, right? So Luffy needs to learn about that here in ELBAPH, which is their deity, okay? So we're going to learn probably a lot more about the religious aspect of One Piece, like theology and stuff that we normally ever do. Like in Skypiea, definitely, there was a lot of overt themes with Eneru. It was Godland Skypiea, and he claimed to be a god and all that stuff. But, we delved into that a little bit, but it was more of like the Skypians just being afraid of Eneru. So, he wanted to be called a god. So he's like, okay, yes, God Eneru will believe in you because they don't want to get electrocuted and stuff like that. But we didn't see like temples or churches or like any prayers, in the name of Eneru or something like that. We didn't really start getting that until the last arc with Egghead, when Oda was setting up the stuff with Kuma and the church. So this is what Oda will do a lot of times. He'll establish things in the previous arc, so then we really touch upon them in the full way in the current arc. It makes, it's like, oh, this was already established, okay? So I think we're going to go more into it here. I think there might be a church or a temple or something in the land of ELBAPH where Luffy is going to go in, and they might explain the whole thing with the sun god to him, and then he goes into his Gear 5th form, and we might have an awkward moment where, like, what if there's a giant priest or something that's just like, oh, the sun god Nika has arose again. He has descended from on high. We worship thee. And Luffy's just there, like, picking his nose in Gear 5th or something, like, ha, you guys are funny, And it's like, Luffy obviously isn't going to care about that, but that is going to be kind of significant, considering Road considered himself the sun god. Loki was calling himself the sun god. I have a feeling there's other giants in ELBAPH that call themselves the sun god. There might be a prophecy or something that someday the sun god is going to be reincarnated and come back, which is kind of what happened with Luffy's fruit. The giants might have a relationship with JoyBoy a few generations back and things, and so there might be this prophecy, and Luffy, like, to a T, solidifies that prophecy and carries it out. And Dory and Bragi, once again, they're a little bit out of the loop here, okay? They were pirates, and then they were fighting on Little Garden for 100 years. So the giant warrior pirates and the new giant pirates, they are very much the warrior class of ELBAPH. But there could be a group that are all about, like, the religious aspect of this, like the clergy and stuff like that, right? And they might look at Luffy in a completely different way, okay? Who else? I mean, we know Jarl, I think it's Jarl. I know Jarl is there. He's like 400 years old. He was also a warrior, and he's probably pretty senile right about now. So he might be the one living in that castle. He might be like the ruler of that particular village that we saw in the last chapter. And so Jarl might come out and be like, he's like, oh, wait a minute, you're the sun god? Let me get my glasses on. Oh my God, it's God. God is here, right? So, it would be interesting if, like, what if we did a thing where maybe not the actual legit sun deity, but what if it's a situation where JoyBoy, because JoyBoy definitely had something to do with ELBAPH, like absolutely, and he had the Hito no Mi model sun god Nika, right? Okay, great. So what if JoyBoy, way back in the day, and we've already established that hockey and things can be stored inside of rope, and what if there's other things they can be stored inside, like, okay, what if the reason the giants can utilize the painters and the sunstone and the sunlight and the rainbow bridges and all that stuff, what if it was because of like a devil fruit awakening ability, something that JoyBoy set up and established 900 or I guess like around 800 years ago during the Void Century? Like, he did some kind of magic, some kind of ability with his devil fruit or his hockey or something, and that effect lingers, and it's because of using that power. Because remember, Luffy literally has the power of a sun deity. That is the mythical zone model. It is a sun god. So what if, JoyBoy, and we saw it with Haki. He was able to store Haki in a rope. Maybe he could store Devil Fruit abilities too, or his Haki and Devil Fruit powers mixed or something like that. It might have been something of that, reason. And, you go to the top of the heaven layer or something and the sun is beaming down, and that's how the giants like charge up their sunstones and things like that. And that's all because of JoyBoy that did that originally. It was like his godly divine power and gift that he gave to the giants. And then he died, but his fruit was reincarnated somewhere. And then there is this prophecy that exists on ELBAPH. Like one day the sun god will rise again, and he does in Luffy form. Okay, so I don't know, but I just wanted to throw that idea out there as like a thing, because we got to start learning about JoyBoy. Oda is not just going to wait until the Void Century flashback to learn anything about JoyBoy. We actually just learned a little bit about him during Egghead, right? So we learned he was from the Ancient Kingdom. We learned about his relationship with Emmett. We're learning little like breadcrumbs about JoyBoy's life leading up to the massive Void Century flashback. We're going to get like sooner rather than later. Now, in the context of One Piece, sooner rather than later could be like 5 years, but you know what I mean, right? Like, we're in the final saga. We are going to get a Void Century flashback at some point, and I would like to know a little bit more about JoyBoy to like ask more questions about, because right now, like, we know enough about him to ask a certain amount of questions. I want to know a little bit more so that we have even more questions, and then all of those are answered during the Void Century. That would be cool, right? Anyway, so those are just my random spitball ideas on what's going to happen with this magical cube thing. All right. Moving on to tree facts, letter F. This was fun because when I looked up all the different names of trees that start with the letter F, there's a lot of trees that are called like false trees. So there's a false acacia tree. There's a false cypress tree. And I thought it would be kind of like cheap to do something like that. So instead, I look up like a list of trees that start with that particular letter. And there's usually one out of the list that's like, oh, that's the one. And in this case, we have the flame tree. So I immediately thought a tree with like super bright, vivid orange and red leaves. And that's basically the case. So this right here is the flame tree, Delonix regia. Okay, also known as the flamboyant tree for that reason. That's like another term for it. So it is native to the island of Madagascar, well known for its lemurs and some Ben Stiller movies. That's, yeah, Madagascar, okay? Now, it is there a little bit endangered because it has, like, a lot of it has been removed, like, from that particular area. Now, it's an ornamental tree because it looks really cool. So the reason why it's such a big deal and it's called the flame tree is because during the summer months, it will still have these bright red leaves. And there's other variations that have yellow leaves and stuff like that. But it looks really cool. I have a tree in my backyard that for, like, 2 weeks during the autumn, the leaves turn super bright red, and it's really pretty to look at, but then it dies almost immediately. All the leaves fall off, okay? So having a tree that stays like a bright, vibrant red all year round, or like during the summer months, that'd be pretty cool. In India, actually, it is symbolic of summer in general because of the way it looks. Its root system, though, is very shallow, which means planting these trees, like, ornamentally in a town or a city or near buildings is a problem because that means the roots are not going to go super deep. They're going to spread out, and they could damage, like, plumbing and sewage, and they go up, like, if you ever been, like, walking in a city street, and there might be a tree that might be the roots growing under the sidewalk, and that breaks and cracks and raises up the sidewalk and things like that. It does that kind of stuff in the city, so you got to be careful with that. The seed pods are pretty cool because the seed pods can grow upwards of over a foot in length, like upwards, I think, to like 2 feet long is like the largest they can ever get. So these huge seed pods that grow very rapidly. That's pretty neat. And overall, it represents passion, beauty, and strength. So there you go. There's the flame tree, Ace's favorite tree. All right. Well, anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope it made a little bit of sense. Teching 101 signing out. Go to that rainbow end screen. We're going to have a lot of rainbows in this arc, so you just be ready.